8:39 exactly. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We are now joined by Attorney Ziyaad Ebrahim Patel. He's been on the show several times, but never enough time when he's on the show because there's just so many unanswered questions. Well, there's so many questions that I would like to put to him, but we don't have the time to answer. Today we're going to be looking at the issue around the South African that settled in the occupied territory and was subsequently killed 2 days ago in the Al-Quds compound. I'm going to share some thoughts by some people, some organizations around this issue, and we'll get Ziyaad Ebrahim Patel to respond. So, but Iqbal Jasar from Media Review Network has this to say: South African mercenary in apartheid's Israel's terrorist army, David Kay, met his end, that was yesterday or the day before, in Al-Quds. We at Media Review Network in South Africa call on the South African government, call on DIRCO and all relevant authorities to urgently investigate South Africans serving in Israel as mercenaries in direct violation of the FMMA. Ziyaad Ebrahim Patel, Assalamu alaikum, welcome to the program, and you can respond to that first statement.
Okay. Wa alaikum assalam, Julie, and Ziyaad will just be fine. Yes, I've heard absolutely correct. Iqbal Jasar is 100% correct. This is a situation that is ongoing not only in South Africa but across multiple jurisdictions across the world, where there is this kind of Zionist recruitment of young South Africans and young other nationals, both male and female, into the Israeli Defense Force. We've been looking at some of the reactions since the killing of this South African citizen that then made Aliyah, as they would call it, to Israel or to Jerusalem. And in fact, Eliyahu David Kay, I think at the time of his death was about 26. But he already previous to that had gone to occupied Palestine by 2016, and after having studied there, enlisted in the IDF. The IDF initially refused, and this was in the Jerusalem Post. The IDF initially refused to allow him to serve as in a combat unit because of some medical issues, but he was insistent, and eventually was allowed to join the paratroopers brigade in the Arrow Company for the ultra-Orthodox soldiers. He also served for part of his stint along the Gaza border. So this is by no means an exemplary South African national or citizen that has been killed, but intentionally and willfully went over into occupied Palestine, went to serve in a Zionist army, and of course we know through historically what the IDF has perpetrated in Gaza in 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, and most recently this year in May 2021, where children are killed and the gravest of atrocities are perpetrated. So certainly, there's nothing good out of this. And this particular person was a mercenary that served in the Zionist army.
And there's such a type of creatures all around the world, killing people, obviously for the sake of self-enrichment, and have no conscience about the issue. However, we have a tweet from Africa for Palestine. They are saying, we cannot mourn the death of a white, racist South African mercenary who chose to move to Israel, join the Israeli army, and kill Palestinians. David Kay clearly loved apartheid, an absolute disgrace to our country. Your thoughts?
Most certainly, he is an absolute disgrace to our country. and an absolute disgrace to our constitutional democracy that we have in place that first and foremost puts the fundamental respect for human rights at the fore. So fundamental human rights, the right to live in equality, dignity, all these rights that have been given to South Africans post-apartheid. And what South Africa needs to do is is part of the international community of nations, and to ensure that those kind of values are imbibed across countries and across the world. Israel is not that kind of state in the way it violates fundamental human rights of Palestinians daily. There's so much of record of human rights violations, international resolutions and conventions that Israel has contravened, and yet they continue to perpetrate these crimes with impunity. An aspect of work, Julie, that I'm very involved in, as you know, is international human rights and lawfare. And a component of lawfare is to hold particularly war criminals accountable for crimes perpetrated with impunity. And this is in direct relation to the IDF and their, what they have done over the last decade just in the Gaza Strip. But we must also take note that when these people get recruited, they are violating what we call the regulation of the Foreign Military Assistance Act. This is an act that specifically does not allow any South African national or citizen to serve in foreign army or to act as a mercenary. There is other legislation that has been pending, but due to certain promulgations not having gone through yet, the Foreign Military Assistance Act still stands in this country. And there's specific processes that need to be undergone, and you need to be able to get permission from a specific committee that's stipulated in the legislation before any sort of service can happen in a foreign army. So our law is enabled to deal with these kind of perpetrators from South Africa, whether they go to occupy Palestine and return, that they be then duly arrested and investigated for contravention of this act. But also it goes further and beyond that. South Africa is a party to the Rome Statute. We have domesticated what you call the International Criminal Court Act, South Africa's implementation of it, and that specifically deals with war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, and crimes of aggression. And in most instances, the IDF has acted with impunity where they've perpetrated the most egregious crimes against all mankind, and in this instance, Palestinians. So these South Africans, both male and female, that go to serve are not only violating the regulations of the Foreign Military Assistance Act, but also violating our other laws where we've domesticated the Rome Statute. Adding to that, Julie, we also have, the Zionists are very clever and very adept in always labeling, and even the way you see the narrative has been spun in this story of making the Hamas operative, the terrorist, and in relation to terror-related activity. But Palestine is under occupation. The holy city is under occupation, and Palestinians have the right to resist. And as long as Palestinians' rights are being downtrodden and being violated, the right of resist always will remain. Now, the Zionists and in this country, and the Zionist Federation in this country, will say that, Hamas are terrorists and they conducted terror-related activities. But to put it on the other shoe, that these criminals that are going over and going to serve in the IDF are in fact also violating our protection of constitutional democracy against terror-related activities. So in fact, they are by and large the biggest terrorists that you can have around, and they in fact perpetrating what you call wide-scale state terrorism against the Palestinian people.
Absolutely. Ziyaad, I have two more questions before we wrap up. This is just a statement that I want to make, but I will leave this interview for another time. You are aware of the fact that Preeti Patel in the UK is calling for Hamas to be labeled as a terrorist organization. I'm absolutely outraged. I'm sure as are you, but we do need to leave this for another for another interview. You talked about these mercenaries violating South African and international law. What can be done in these circumstances? You obviously can't get them back into the country to serve charges put against them, because they probably won't come back to South Africa to answer for why they become mercenaries. Can they then be deemed as, can their citizenship, South African citizenship, be revoked? What sort of action can you take against these people in absentia?
Yes, that's an extremely good question, and this again comes back to some of the core work that I'm involved in building across jurisdictions, across multiple jurisdictions, kind of legislation that can be implemented. And this kind of legislation, if it's done across different countries, would be able to also then hold the same war criminals accountable for these crimes that are perpetrated. Julie, the international institutions remain intractable. I think in 2016, I did go to Geneva, and I attended the Human Rights Council and submitted a report on Palestinian prisoners' rights. We were successful in getting good resolutions out. But again, the United Nations are controlled by the European states and by the US and by the strong Zionist lobby within those institutions and governments. And very little is then done. Unlike if you look at the war tribunal that was set up here for the former Bosnia-Herzegovina or, Rwanda, up till today, we still don't have any war tribunal that's set up by the Security Council when it comes to the, egregious crimes that have been perpetrated against Palestinians or holding Zionists accountable. Also, the International Criminal Court has now, in fact, started to look at certain crimes that were perpetrated, I think, since 2014, with Palestine now provided with observer status or state status at the ICC. So there is some movement at the ICC, but it's been a long time coming. I mean, for instance, we've been involved since 2008, 2009 during the first Gaza war, and submissions were made to the ICC, and things were just pending. Or, for instance, the flotilla raid attack in 2010. So I think there is some movement there. But coming back to your question, in South Africa, I've prepared what you call IPSA, which is the Implementation for Palestinian Solidarity Rights Act. And this act, in fact, is a bill that was then, the IPSA bill was then endorsed by Mandla Mandela. And in this kind of legislation, we specifically deal with this issue of South African Jews going to serve in the IDF. And having this not only in terms of universal jurisdiction or customary law, where, it's still very loose, and how do you implement it if they're out of the country, and if they come into the country, can you use the law, but they have specific laws in relation to holding them to accountable. So there are various avenues. If there are other countries that also have same or similar legislation or want to implement universal jurisdiction, or for instance, they have laws like the FMMA, that they certainly can be held accountable. For instance, in South Africa, it's not only South African nationals or citizens that may travel to occupy Palestine and then return to South Africa and then, can be arrested and investigated. But it could also be institutions, companies, everybody that may be involved in the funding of this kind of recruitment program that could be held responsible. Or, for instance, Israeli citizens that come to South Africa and have served in the IDF and can be investigated to be found to have served in a particular unit could be arrested and investigated in terms of our legislation. So
okay. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Attorney Ziyaad Ebrahim Patel talking to us about this issue. I really am sorry that I have to cut it off there, but we are constrained for time. But shukran very much. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Julie. You have a good day. Thank you.
And you. 8:53 exactly. When we get back, we're going to be talking about the strike, the unions calling for a consumer boycott. Let's hear what that is all about. Stay with us.
Every 60 seconds,